Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about universities going to war with the Trump administration. I'm going to talk about those 15% indirects at NIH. I'm going to discuss how Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has cut the funding for an oral COVID-19 vaccine study, and finally the glut of biology PhD students. So let's get started. All right, first of all, the Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, what does it really mean? It means that if Donald Trump offers some policy proposal, everyone, rather than engage with the merits of the proposal, instantly react. They position themselves in a ludicrous position against him at all costs. And sometimes that succeeds, but sometimes it'll backfire tremendously. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. So let's talk about this 15% indirects. Of course, I explained on a prior video that universities have these sweetheart deals with the National Institutes of Health where they get lofty indirects. Those are not monies paid to people to do research. They're monies paid to the university to have the research infrastructure. Those monies are not accounted for. I mean, you're giving 15%, 20%, 60%, 70%, 95% indirects. That is just money given to them. They can do whatever they want with it. Now, they're supposed to pay for the lights and the heating and the lab space, but they also pay for things that we may not agree with, like mandatory DI training. And they also pay for things like giving people slush funds so that they can have lavish travel and go to fancy hotels and fly business class. Some universities even give a fraction of the indirect right back to the investigator to use as they wish, which, if anything, proves that they don't need all those indirects to run the lights and the overhead. And all sorts of things like this. Trump administration comes in, they say, we're going to cap the indirects at 15%, put it on par with foundations like Chan Zuckerberg and Gates, and everyone went crazy. Universities went absolutely crazy. They put out memo after memo, press release saying that you're going to kill people. You're going to kill people because science is going to die. We're going to lose a generation of scientists. Absolutely, universities' position is no way in hell. Now, I think they're making the same mistake they made during the pandemic, which is they are reacting instantly to what he says, and they're going the opposite direction. Here's what they should do. First of all, they should realize that within universities, there's a breadth of different opinions. I just read a nice op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today by Maya Sen at Harvard, who says that actually, universities do need to come to the negotiating table, and if they're perfectly honest, they have a weak hand. The public thinks very poorly of them because of their abysmal conduct on popular issues such as the war in the Middle East and their abysmal conduct on how they handle affirmative action and diversity and admissions, which is against probably the majority of the American people, and their abysmal conduct during COVID-19. Their trust has plummeted. Public perception of them is in the toilet. They're worse than Congress. So they have a weak negotiating position, right? That's one. Two, there's no constitutional guarantee that they get to collect hand over fist money from the taxpayer to fund whatever they want to fund at their university. There's no right to that. And so she writes that universities should try to negotiate with governments. But I had a different proposal in my Substack, related but different. My proposal is they should do what they didn't do during COVID-19. During COVID-19 in 2020, not a single major university had a roundtable or debate on school closure, lockdown, on masking, community masking. They went along for the ride. Now you might say that, well, how can they debate something where the science is settled? Well, the science wasn't settled on any of those issues. And proof of that is that 1 week, Fauci said, don't mask. And next week he said, do mask. Surely the science can't be settled when you flip-flop that quickly. And of course, the science was not settled on school closure or lockdowns. And these things were unprecedented draconian restrictions. Universities had faculty, some of whom felt in favor of it, some of whom opposed it. They could have had roundtable discussions, but they chose not to. Same is true here. Instead of having a panel of people debate, what should the indirects be? Should there be more direct line items? Should it be 15% or 20% or 25%? And what kind of checks and balances should be on universities? Should the NIH say, listen, we can go and randomly pick 10 lab experiments from your university, and we'll try to replicate them. And if you're less than 5 out of 10 replication rate, well, your index is going to go down another 5% next year. I think that kind of punishment would be good for universities. It would finally incentivize them to not just produce results, but reproducible results. These are the kinds of discussions that universities need to be having. They need to take the lead in this dialogue. But because they're so focused on the Trump derangement syndrome, they cannot negotiate or think about anything this man is saying. They have gone the 180, taken the opposing degree, and I think they're going to lose. They might win in court for the time being, that indirects can't be changed because these contracts have been made and NIH strictly doesn't have purview and it's in the OMB. Sure, they might win in the short term, but you know what's coming for you next. They may not cut it in the next year, but they're going to cut it hard in the years to come. And it's going to be cut for not just 5 years, but 10 years, and a generation will face indirect shrinkage. And maybe they'll come in even harder than 15%, take you down to 10% if you keep fighting like this. Why don't you engage in the dialogue constructively? Be honest. Most university research is terrible. The premises are terrible. I've covered so many NIH-funded studies on my channel over the years and plenary session. The premises are terrible. The methodology is terrible. And here's proof in the pudding. When independent researchers take lab experiments published in even the creme de la creme biomedical journals, they can only replicate a fraction of those experiments. In the recent biology cancer reproducibility study, it was 40% could be replicated by 3 out of 5 metrics. I won't bore you with the statistics, but it's not everything. They're taking NIH money. They're doing research that doesn't replicate. What do they expect? The public should just continue to provide welfare for upper middle class people to play around in the laboratory and produce results that very rarely tell us something true and useful about the universe? Now that's the kicker. Very rarely they do tell us something true and useful about the universe, and as a result, funding NIH is a good use of money. But that doesn't mean it's efficient. Okay, this is the flaw in their argument. I could have 100 acres of land, and I could grow tomatoes on that land. But if I came to you with 100 tomatoes with 100 acres, you're going to say, what the fuck were you doing with that land? You could have grown 100 tons of tomatoes. What are you doing? And the answer is, sure, some tomatoes are growing well, but most of it is a barren field being neglected because they've run it so poorly. And what reform means is, okay, instead of 100 acres, maybe we'll give you 80 acres, but you're really going to need to focus on growing tomatoes, and you'll produce maybe 80 tons. I'm not a tomato expert. I have no clue how much an acre of land will produce, but you get my point. It's about efficiency. The mere fact that they have a few tomatoes to show for the investment, yeah, it's $47 billion. If you really had absolutely no discoveries, that would be beyond chance. You'd really have to go out of your way to try to sabotage it that badly. But the issue is you're not trying to be efficient. You become complacent and lazy. And by not engaging in the dialogue, you're just damning yourself. You're making the same mistake you made in the pandemic. You think there's one true opinion. The one true opinion is whatever the opposite he said is. You stifle all the other opinions in your university, even though there are a lot of faculty who do kind of see some points being made by the administration. You stifle all that. As a Holden Thorpe from Science says, we need to all come together to fight Trump. Holden Thorpe is a naked partisan, and he is just making this worse by making it more polarized. You have a weak hand. Come to the negotiating table. Let's see if you end up with 20, 25%. I think probably 25 to 30% is fair in my opinion, but you have a weak hand. PhDs. I see that some programs are reducing the number of biology PhD slots, and I think what people don't realize is biology PhDs are largely doing day-to-day tasks, are repetitive, hands-on, sort of tedious tasks like pipetting or transferring cells from cell culture or running experiments. The cognitive part is above all that. That's what happens when you see the results of the experiment, you see how it goes. Of course, there's always troubleshooting along the way, but the cognitive part, the reason why you hire a head chef of a restaurant is not that he's preparing every single dish. It's that he's thinking about the menu and the broader pairings, and he's thinking about how we can have a good budget by buying the right goods. That's the head chef job, not the person who is the line cook, okay? But PhD is just we work them washing dishes for 4 years. We work them as the line cook. And then we pretend that we're teaching them to be great scientists. Okay. In response to the indirect cuts, universities should be firing the useless administrators they have. The huge administrative state they built with those funds that's completely useless, those are the people who need to be fired. But of course, universities, once again, doing the wrong thing. They're cutting back on the number of PhD slots and other programs. Well, ironically, even though they weren't supposed to do that, cut back on the mission-driven aspect of care, they've actually done a good thing, in my opinion. We train too many biology students. It is a Ponzi scheme. It is also an exploitive labor scheme. Let me give you the points. We train tens of thousands of biology PhDs each year. Only 15% ultimately attain a faculty position as a PI running their own lab. The rest, 40% of them quit in the middle of the PhD. Okay, that's already a huge loss. And then the rest of them trickle out later, either in postdoc or pre-postdoc. They go to the industry, other jobs. Now, it's Ponzi because people are not given these facts when they sign up for it. They don't know how fleetingly rare it is to run your own lab. And also, the reason there's so many is not because there's a societal need that everybody in finance should have a PhD in physics, like one of my friends has a PhD in physics, he works in finance. No, there's not need for that. It's that we need those laborers in the space to run all these labs. That's why we have so many of them. And it's exploited because they're paid garbage wages, $30,000 to $46,000 wages annually for something like 50, 60, 70, or 80 hours of work. If you're getting paid $45,000 a year for 80 hours of work, that's a salary of $10 an hour. That's insulting, that's degrading. It might even be below the minimum wage in a lot of places. And universities get away with this because they call them students. You call someone a student or an intern or a trainee, you can abuse them horrifically. You could have a nanny and work them all day and say they're a student nanny. They're just learning how to nanny, okay? It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. They should cut back on biology PhD slots. There are way too many. And some people say, well, I used what I learned in my PhD and I did a good job in the industry and finance and this. I'm sure that's true. We all think that what we went through was necessary to be who we are. But the real counterfactual is what would have happened if you didn't do the PhD. You very likely would have learned critical thinking skills than in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years like the PhD. You would have learned those skills in 1 or 2 years, perhaps on the job. You might have done a master's instead. The counterfactual is not that you froze yourself in space-time and didn't learn anything. It's what you would have done in the outside of the PhD. And some people just needed time to mature in their critical thinking, etc. So if you really want to test the hypothesis, what the PhD gives if you don't pursue a lab, you need to find programs that some years admit 5 and some years admit 6, and compare the 6th person not admitted in one calendar year against the 6th person admitted in the other. You know what I mean? A natural experiment, a regression discontinuity design, and show me the difference in the career outcomes of those two people among those who chose to go to the industry. Show me those differences. I think that's the right study for it, something like that, or a natural experiment where, for instance, they cut the program suddenly, which is going to happen, so you can follow this out in a few years. But bottom line, this narrative that we're losing a generation of scientists, it's such bullshit. It's such bullshit because each year, 85% of the PhDs we graduate do not run their own labs. We're losing everyone every year. What are we going to lose now? 87%? There's a few people we didn't admit. So actually the percentages might look better, but there's a few people who never started the PhD in the first place. It's a marginal difference. You want scientists, you can go outside and hire the last 3 years of graduates who don't have a job. You need some more scientists. You're not losing a generation. That's hyperbole. And that hyperbole exists because people suffer from the TDS. They cannot look at his policies objective at all. They're complete idiots. These are the same idiots that when this guy said we should reopen schools, they said we should close schools because they're so stupid. They can't use their brain. They're just saying whatever he says, the opposite. Let's do the opposite. RFK Jr. Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. has decided that he's going to cut funding on an oral COVID-19 vaccine right before they're about ready to run the trial. Oh no, the media says. Oh no, he's stopping clinical trials that could be life-saving. Well, let me tell you right now. First of all, the federal government should not be subsidizing any more fucking COVID-19 studies, okay? It's ridiculous that we're subsidizing these companies. They've made $100 billion plus. On what fucking planet do they need some government handout to run a study? You are shitting me if you're telling me they need a handout. I think it's ridiculous that they're getting a handout. The Biden administration, by giving the grant, complete corruption. I mean, they have $100 billion in profit. They do not need a cent more to run their R&D. Number one. Number two, I don't know if you got the memo, okay, the Biden administration who made for this funding. COVID-19 is no longer a serious health threat. There's no pandemic going on. We don't even know the infection fatality rate anymore because it's hardly documented. It's become a common cold virus. So we certainly don't have an emergency situation where we need to be funding some novel oral COVID-19 vaccine. Number three, if you do run a randomized controlled trial, the industry should fund it. The primary endpoint should be severe disease in depth. And if the industry had to pay for it their damn self, I bet they wouldn't even run it. The power calculation will put sample size in about 100,000 per arm, maybe 250,000 per arm. And that's enriching for elderly people, it probably is my estimate. And you won't even be able to fund it. It would be such a fool's errand to fund. And finally, nobody would take it. If you come up with a novel mRNA vaccine like Moderna's developing for bird flu, I promise you, lots of people don't want it. They are fed up with that technology. They're skeptical of the technology. You lied to them in the past. They're not even wanting it. So that's also a key point about acceptability to the population is a factor in governing clinical trials. This oral COVID-19 vaccine should have been aborted a long time ago. And if anyone wants to fund it, then sure, find some investors who are foolish enough to take their investments and put it into the company. I don't think you'll find any. Government cannot subsidize fool's errands, okay? It can't subsidize your fool's errands. It really baffles me. It really baffles me. Sometimes I think that, it would be better if you just took some of this funding and just flew an airplane over an impoverished area and just dumped out the dollar bills. That would honestly probably be better than funding these corrupt crony shit companies running shit trials for shit products. I mean, I really do wonder about that thought experiment, how far you could take it. But RFK Jr., he should cut that, and he should cut that Moderna bird flu funding. And guess what? Anyone developing these products should not be getting subsidies to develop these products. Maybe it was true, of course, in 2020, I supported Operation Warp Speed. There was a crisis going on. But how do you justify that right now? There's no crisis going on. Okay. Finally, NIH return on investment. A lot of people say that every dollar you give the NIH brings you $2.50 back. I'm going to do a deep dive on that paper. But let me make one point. We gave, through the NIH, a few $1 million to the EcoHealth Alliance. And we didn't get $1 back for those, did we? We probably lost $20 trillion globally from that little grant. So NIH has a lot of successes, but one minus 20 trillion on your register there, one minus 20 trillion in your Excel spreadsheet, and it's probably not $2.60 anymore. It might be negative a few $100, okay? That's a big loss, a minus 20 trillion. So even if you had some game-changing drugs, a minus 20 trillion and 20 million dead bodies, that tends to pull down the ledger a little bit. So shut up with that stupid statistic. Last point, I've heard so many stupid statistics. 99.4% of all drugs owe themselves to NIH funding. That's it might as well just say 100% then. Say 110% if you're making up bullshit numbers. Okay, I believe it's probably 40 to 80, but 99.4 is too high. I read another statistic, 43% of all the money that goes into drug development comes from the NIH. Okay, that's gotta also be bullshit. I mean, I hate pharma as much as anyone. You can watch my videos. Everyone knows that. I'm critical of pharma, okay? But they are spending more money than the NIH, full stop. It's not 43% NIH to whatever, 57% pharma. More pharma spending more, okay? That's just the basic math. Just don't make up bullshit statistics. It's just like saying, how bad COVID is for kids. They're all getting MISC. It's the same stupidity. If you actually acknowledge that the IFR in a healthy child is, actually, we don't have any record of a healthy child dying of COVID-19. If you actually say the IFR in all children is something like 1 in 250,000 or 500,000 or 1 million, then of course the policy response is going to be very different. So if you make up bullshit numbers, you're going to get bullshit policy. And that happens when people suffer from TDS. So those are my thoughts. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. See if I have time to clip this. I'm on the run this week. We'll see. So follow me on Instagram. Follow me on X. Follow me on drvinayprasad.com. That's the most important. That's Substack, where you'll actually directly get my email address. And if these YouTube people put any more banners under my thing, we'll ask the CDC. I've had enough of that nonsense. The censoring has got to end, and hopefully we're coming into a new era. So until next time.